as Freddie said, I've been working on the issue of both the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by the Common Core and next generation science standards. I just collectively call them the new standards, and that they present for English language learners and for really for all students. But English language learners especially deserve attention. And I kind of characterized the challenge of the Common Core referring to some core theoretical foundations, and to do this I took some dusty books out of my bookshelf here just to suggest that these are really deep philosophical questions that go back to linguists such as Noam Chomsky, philosophers like John Austin, and other social scientists who've really looked at kind of how language and thinking are represented, and then in bilingual students how they might be represented in two languages. And so I think, you know, I really, as an academic, I kind of put the whole problem of access to the Common Core for English language learners as really a special instance of this larger theoretical problem. And the work that we're doing, you can find almost everything that I referred to today in Understanding Language. That's our website. You'll see our URL there, and please visit it. Understanding Language Initiative is really a collaboration of, I just have wonderful collaborators on this that include people who have been involved in the writing of the Common Core, Phil Darrow in math, Susan Pimentel for English Language Arts, as well as Helen Quinn, who was the chair of the National Research Council committee that came up with the Next Generation Science Foundation, or Next Generation Science Standards framework. Various people who work on ELL issues, George Bunch, Judith Moskovich, Oki Lee, Aida Walke, and others who work in the policy and professional development arena. Robert Linquanti, Chris Minnick, who's now the Executive Director of Council of Chief State School Officers, Gabriela Uro, who works at the Council of Great City Schools. So, so it's a great collaboration of people who have spent their careers both in sort of advancing the concepts underlying the Common Core, as well as those who've worked on behalf of English language learners. There's a much bigger group that, you know, think of Understanding Language as an ever-expanding group of scholars and practitioners concerned with the Common Core. I'm going to go through some historical slides just to suggest that we're really, I see the Common Core as really the third wave of the standards movement, which began with this old black and white photo of the commission that created a nation at risk, and was a call for standards. That then you know, became federal policy through the reauthorization of the ESEA under Bill Clinton, Improving America's Schools Act, which was really the first piece of ESEA legislation that brought standards-based thinking into law. The No Child Left Behind in 2001 further developed it in several ways. It added teeth through the accountability piece that many people love to hate. It also, though, also through Title III, added the piece about English language proficiency standards. So in addition to the content standards that states had, and at that time it was state by state, there was also English language proficiency standards, and what the language in No Child Left Behind that I've highlighted here suggests the important words here really are around inclusion of English language learners, limited English proficient students in Title I, around accountability, as well as disaggregated, that the data must be disaggregated by subgroups of students. And that's the one piece, even though No Child Left Behind is controversial, most advocates like that part of it, which is continuing to shine the light on the gap between subgroups of students. And then Title III, Section 3113, which refers to the English language proficiency standards, and in there is the embodiment of what we mean about the relationship of content and language, and that is aligned with academic content. So that it really thinks, this is the legislative version of what philosophers try to do about thinking about the relationship between language and cognition. What the Common Core does is, I believe, it really, and the Understanding Language Initiative, our analysis would suggest that it really is important because of the perspective that it puts on content, and the perspective that it puts on content is very much a language frame. And I have this picture of the camels to suggest, just to remind me to talk about it, and that is, I love this photo from National Geographic by a photographer, George Steinmetz, and this is really the profile of the camels that you see in this picture are really actually just the shadows of the camel. The camels are the white lines that you see at sitting at the feet of the shadows, and it's because of the angle of the sun that you get to really see the profiles of the camel. And so, you know, if you were flying over this at midday, you wouldn't recognize these as camels. And so this just to say that the language perspective that the Common Core kind of privileges is a particular form of language. And so if you think of the old paradigm, when you thought about the relationship between content and language, the way in which it was mostly thought, and you know, you find this in typical kind of implementation of programs such as Sheltered Instructional Observation Protocol, or SIOP, in which teachers come up with a language and a content objective and a language objective. Often language objectives have been thought of as the vocabulary that supports the content instruction. And really what's significant about the Common Core is that it really raises the level of language beyond vocabulary and sentence structures to discourse, to text complexity, explanation, argumentation. These are what linguists would talk about as the pragmatics of language. So it really shifts from vocabulary and grammar to add much more complex, pragmatic, and even sociolinguistic dimensions of language, and that's really the shadow of language that we think is really significant and noteworthy about the Common Core. This other graph, which is hard to read, and I know that these slides are being made available to you, so you can kind of look at this on your own and expand it. But we have an analysis which Tina Chuk, who works with us, provided. And this graph, we're very proud to say, was published in Science last April. And this was looking at the language practices, the practice standards in the math and science at ELA, suggesting that functions about constructing viable arguments, critiquing the reasoning of others, engaging in argument from evidence, and so forth, all really reflect those higher order functions of language that I was just highlighting. We can add to the policy piece, which is, you know, it's interesting to see. You know, I've worked in policy for many years now, and there are these policy moments or events that crystallize the thinking, and often the crystallization isn't pleasant. But there are policy moments, and the one policy moment that kind of helps bring language and content together is, you know, as I said, the law itself already stated the importance of aligning the Title III assessments in language proficiency with academic content. Well, additionally, what happened in the last couple of years was, because it looked like with the dysfunctional Congress that ESEA would not be reauthorized, which meant that essentially we're at the 100% proficient bar for No Child Left Behind, which means that almost all schools and school districts will have failed the accountability test for No Child Left Behind. And because of those pressures, the Obama administration started issuing ESEA flexibility waivers. And this map here shows the states. This is even outdated. There's more states involved now which have either received or applied for flexibility waivers. And in that is this I tell my policy students about the importance of regulation. And here's an instance where this is regulatory language around flexibility. And in this regulation is this highlighted section about the English learners and the ELP standards. And in there is a word, correspond. The ELP standards that correspond to its college and career ready standards. And this was a new term that was thrown into the policy mix. And it was a new term. It was actually introduced by Gary Cook at University of Wisconsin. He suggested this to the feds, and they took that up, and they said, well, alignment isn't really the right word, because alignment really is a standard to standard correspondence, or alignment of a test item to the standard. But really in English, when you're linking two things that are different, which is English language proficiency and standards, content standards, then maybe there should be some other way of thinking about it, and correspond came up. Well, what happened in the flexibility agreements was that state school chiefs all had to sign off on adopting English language proficiency standards that correspond to the Common Core. And because they were under such pressure to do it, they signed off on it, and after they signed off on it, they said, what does that exactly mean? And so correspond, you know, kind of in a sense, the states and the policy and the practitioners at the state level started going on a search for the meaning of correspond, and this is probably the largest dictionary entry for one word, correspond. There's a document that the Council of Chief State School Officers produced that is titled, that has a long, ugly title, and you can find this document if you Google or search ELPD CCSSO. But if you search for that, you'll come up with a long document. But essentially, what it is it's the best that we could do as a field to look at the Common Core and the next generation science standards and try to understand within the content standards what the language demands are. So it's really, in a sense, a linguistic highlight of the content standards, and it has tables by English language arts, math, and science separately, and it's really basically, in a sense, a roadmap to what English language proficiency standards should be addressing, which is the language that support the content practices in the content areas. And so, as you can see, that moves us significantly away from thinking about English language proficiency as disembodied from academic content, but rather embedded in the practices of those disciplines. We've been focusing a lot on what might be considered language artifacts of content learning, and these are somewhat academic words, but we tend to think about these if you further synthesize the language demands of the disciplines that are contained in the ELPD framework, you can think about sort of constructive classroom discourse, a student-to-student discourse, and how they add ideas, understanding the reasoning of others and so forth, building arguments, as one important artifact of content learning, and we're focused on these things because we think that they really become the bedrock of formative assessment practice. So constructive classroom discourse, transactions with text, evidence of transactions with text, marginal note-taking, connections between texts, what notes that students take and so forth. That could be an artifact. And the third one is of course around evidence, writing to evidence or purposeful writing. One of the things that I kind of laid out here in this slide, our goals in understanding language. We've, part of what we try to do is to say, okay, these are the important parts of the language embedded in the new standards. So part of our goal is we want to share exemplars of how the Common Core standards, Next Generation Science standards are supported for ELLs by creating exemplars. If you go to our website, you'll see an exemplar that we posted on kind of a model unit in 7th grade ELA, and it's framed around persuasive communication. And the other math exemplar that you'll see, the exemplar that annotates math problems in elementary, middle, and high school. But these are just really, we don't need to build out the curriculum by any means, but rather to just sort of say, okay, here's some rigor which can be made accessible to English language learners. We have worked with schools and districts around the identification of existing materials, development of new units through that support the new standards, and try to establish collaborations with school districts and universities. So here's a screenshot of the ELA middle school unit and the math annotated materials. And so please go and take a look at them, send us comments, but we certainly have had lots of downloads of these units. Just examples of some of our collaborations with our ELA unit. We had we had initial reviews of the unit, which this particular unit was developed by Aida Walke and her team at West Ed, and we worked with a number of school districts to just do a paper review of the units, and then we had a pilot implementation in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Chicago, and Denver that we documented with fair amount of effort, and got samples of student work and videotaped and so forth, just to kind of document implementation, accompanied by professional development. And then we've been working quite deeply in Oakland because of well, my co-chair in understanding language is Maria Santos, who is the deputy superintendent there. And then we've been working with the state of North Carolina around statewide implementation of Common Core, and so I'm going to elaborate a little bit on these efforts. We also have on the teaching channel examples of videos. So Charlotte Mecklenburg was one of the districts where we piloted the unit, and then I just had a senior moment where we had the actual videotaping was in Denver, and so we collaborated with the Teaching Channel to develop their 5 videos that you'll see at the Teaching Channel website that shows various aspects of the implementation of the ELA unit. Just wanted to give you a flavor of how things are playing out in Oakland. The Oakland again focuses on the 3 legs: speaking, listening, reading, comprehension, and writing arguments with evidence. It's based on, this is Oakland's representation of how they communicate to staff, and this is across teachers of all content areas, to focus on listening and speaking in academic discussions, writing arguments with evidence, and reading with comprehension increasingly complex non-fiction texts. Oakland works with the site leaders to establish priorities within these areas, and try to implement these shifts. And sort of Oakland recognizes its realities, that if you took academic discussions in the classrooms, that there's inconsistencies, that often think, pair, share, turn and talk is about the extent of the kind of academic discussions that students do that might be found that don't really lead to deep understanding of the content, and that much of this interaction is not sustained and purposeful, so that academic discussions become sort of named as a problem area of practice for the site, and the district tries to support enhancements in that area. Oakland works out of a theory of action around these academic discussions, which sort of think systematically about the key levers of the shift and how they might impact in the instructional core. They also have used our principles to try to leverage shifts in leadership as well that support these practices. So that's kind of an example of sort of collaborating with districts. I'll be happy later to talk about North Carolina, but in the interest of time, I should probably move on and say that the other area in which we've been quite active, and I'm not sure, I guess there's no way to see the participants in this webinar to have you raise hands, but there's a MOOC which is the ugliest acronym in recent history, but a MOOC is a massive open online course which is free, and free is not a necessary piece of it, but in this case the course is free. We developed this MOOC with some grant funds and offered a MOOC around the first leg of the three prongs that we see as the important shifts in the Common Core around constructive classroom conversations or classroom discourse. And this MOOC we launched in October 21, and we hope to complete, or will be done in early December. And I want to tell you a little bit about that, because it's really an experiment in trying to get to communicate with practitioners about the shifts in language-related shifts in the Common Core. So it's fascinating. We have had these are just some statistics. You know, one of the nice things about a MOOC is that it gives you ongoing live analytics, and so one of the ways in which we formed this MOOC was to have participants organize in teams, and teams of various sizes, and we let these teams form organically, which is people could say, okay, I'd like to start a MOOC with other people in my team or in my region, or people interested in special ed and so forth. And so we ended up with about almost 2,000 students in teams, and there were 511 teams that formed at the beginning of the course. Of course, these are free, and a lot of people come in, and therefore you never know. And initially in our course, about 9,000 people registered. We have about 1,000 auditors who aren't on teams, and then we've got lots of people who either are being voyeurs or just signed up and lost interest and left. And we're in the process of analyzing this, the dropout patterns. The learning cycle for the MOOC is essentially something like this, where what we're doing is having the teachers document conversation in their classroom. So we ask them to record a piece of discourse among their students, about up to 8 turns, and then we have them transcribe it and to reflect on it. So they would they would score it and write comments about the quality of the the discussion, whether it builds both, whether it's constructive and whether it's focused on the standard and builds on the content area, content knowledge. And then we have them imagine what a better conversation might look like. So they would be asked to write a dream version of this. So what would you like to have seen in this? And what they might have done to try to elicit that around scaffolding, and then they go back and try it again, or try to try one of the scaffolds, and so they perform, and then they go back and document, and they basically in this particular MOOC go through 2 cycles of that, and we're in the process just now of the documentation on the second iteration, and one of the questions that we have, of course, is whether the quality of the document that they produce improves over time, and there's also another component in this course, which is teamwork. So again, the teams that we've formed, that's they don't have to do this reflection and discussion in teams, but we're having them do the discussion in teams. We're also learning quite a bit about the conditions of a good team leader, because each of these teams have leads. Here's an example of a sample submission that we got. We received more than 1,500 submissions, so this is a great dissertation for somebody to look at the 1,500 snippets of discourse that we have around content. So here's just a random sample that I took from a math example that was given, and around square root and estimating a square root. So then they take this, they give a dimension, a score, a quantitative score, in this case 3, on a 5-point scale, and a reason for the score, and some reflection. Then there's some peer discussion and so forth. So here's the sample discussion that comes up, and by peers and so forth. So that's kind of the teamwork part of it. So far in this little experiment that we've done, we've had about, these are somewhat old statistics, but about 9,000 that have come through. We have about 2,000 active participants, and about 1,500 first assignments that were fully completed, and we think that this is, well, for MOOCs dropout statistics, this is pretty good. Not great, but not terrible either, and far better than the typical MOOC where the drop-off rate is quite steep. And we think that this is good, especially because we really demanded a lot from teachers to collect the data, analyze it, and participate in discussion. So that's kind of the first piece that we worked on, constructive classroom discourse. We also intend to focus in future MOOCs with somewhat easier data to collect, which is transactions with text and writing samples. They're easy to collect, harder to analyze perhaps, but we'll be experimenting with these other components. I mentioned our work with North Carolina. We're supporting statewide rollout of Common Core in the state, focusing on ELLs and students with disabilities, and we'll be in that part of that rollout involves a MOOC that will support and follow up on face-to-face professional development for districts around the state. And in that MOOC, we're planning on embedding transactions with text as well as purposeful writing, and the starting point for those MOOCs will be implementation or piloting of the understanding language units. There's also this other piece which is somewhat abstract at this point, but we're very interested in this idea of a meta discourse, which is the kind of conversations that students might have when they're shown examples of other students' work. So they might so in a sense, it's a modeling exercise where students might see examples of discourse or writing and so forth, and what kind of discourse students would have, or classroom discourse that would result from looking at examples of other students. Over time, we're envisioning that the student work that's collected by the MOOCs will kind of become sort of a database, a crowdsourced database, because they're peer reviewed and peer evaluated and so forth. And I should add that these are all anonymous, and we have IRB approval to do this. But this will be a database that is of observable artifacts from learning in these 4 dimensions. So we sort of think of that as being a very doable kind of crowdsourcing activity. We're also trying to establish collaborations, and some of you on this webinar might be interested in collaborating with us in really taking different pieces of this very complex area that's created by content areas and grade levels and student subgroups and so forth, and trying to establish collaborations. We've had a number of conversations with people in other universities where we would collaborate in developing content, share the content, but also share student work. So that's kind of our plan for MOOC. Right now, we've just taken that first baby step, although it turned out to be a pretty giant step. My co-instructors in that, Jeff Sweers and Sarah Rutherford Kwok, are we meet weekly and work constantly on the MOOC, and feel pretty exhausted by it, but feel like it's really worthwhile, and I was really glad to be able to share that with you. So hopefully, you'll come and visit our website and take a look at the resources that we have posted at Understanding Language. We also have some academic papers and so forth up there. We also even have archived webinars, although actually we're surprised by how many people actually watch our archived webinars. But and then with our MOOC work, we're really rolling this, really anticipating getting quite active in this, especially finding collaborators in other institutions to help co-develop content.